Hey everybody, welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host, Ruby, and I will be reading Chapter 22 from The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. Now, before we get into it, I would like to ask that you hit that thumbs up button, and if you're not already, please subscribe. I would truly appreciate that. And I do have a new book to read to you all, which I hope that you guys are as excited as I am. But I'm not going to spoil the surprise just yet. Maybe in a few more chapters I will tell you the name of the story. But let's get to it, shall we? So, grab your snack, grab your drink, sit back. Don't forget to turn down the lights. And listen. Chapter 22. That was something Clancy Gray liked to do, apparently. Watch me. Watch me while I sat out on the porch helping Zoo lace her new tennis shoes before walking with her and Hina to the cabin serving as the classroom. Watch me tease Chubs for being the first and only one to get bitten by a tick. Watch me wait by the fire pit with Lee for Mike to arrive with what our duties would be during our time at East River. All this watching from the window on the second story of the office, where he appeared to control everything and do nothing. Mike had mentioned that everyone older than 13 would be responsible for doing some work. I just hadn't realized that the assignments were chosen for you. I didn't mind helping out in the pantry, organizing and counting our supplies, but I would have so preferred being out with Chubs in the camp's small garden or running around the forest like Liam on security detail. It was strange not to spend my entire day with them. The kids I worked with were nice enough, more than nice, actually. Most had never seen the inside of a camp, but then again, I had never cooked a meal, so it wasn't like any of us were winning in the life experience department. What I liked most was their brand of pluck. Lizzie, for instance, had been hiding out at East River for close to 2 years, having narrowly escaped capture by PSFs who had pulled her parents' car over in Maryland. "You just got out and ran?" I asked. "Like the wind," she confirmed. "Didn't have anything on me at all, except what I was wearing. I tried to meet up with my parents again, but they never went back to our old house. I got picked up by a tribe of Greens and brought here." That was another thing. Most of the kids here were either green or blue, with a small, tight-knit group of yellows that didn't really socialize outside of their own circle. Lizzie claimed that there used to be more, but the slip kid had given them permission to head out and form a tribe of their own. "He gave them permission?" I repeated, marking down on many boxes of cereals we had left. "Yeah, and there are other requirements too." That from Dylan, a small-boned kid who had only recently finished his cubby's lessons. He claimed He claimed the nickname came from the wood shelving units Clancy had built to store all of their food, all of their books and schoolwork. You have to have at least a group of 5, he continued. And then Clancy has to determine whether or not it's safe. And you have to swear on your life not to reveal anything about the camp unless it's to another kid in need. And then you can only reveal the clue. It's to keep everyone safe. It would kill him if something happened to a kid because of him. I felt myself soften a little then. It wasn't so much that I didn't trust Clancy's motivations. He just unnerved me. When someone takes such an interest in you, you have to wonder what it is exactly they're searching for in your face. What are you doing? All 3 of us looked over to the door where Clancy stood, stiff and still, staring at me. The wind from the open door behind him tugged at his dark hair, causing it to stand on end. Something inside of me coiled at his expression, but it wasn't fear. "We're sorting," Lizzie said, confused. "Is something wrong?" Clancy snapped out of whatever daze he had been stuck in. "Yeah, sorry, it's just... Ruby, would you mind coming with me for a second? I think there was some confusion on your assignment." I passed my clipboard to Lizzie, wondering why her eyes narrowed at me. "I was assigned to storage," I said when we were standing outside on the porch. "I didn't assign you anything," he said. "I specifically told Mike that." I'd like to think that I wasn't the type of person to be easily intimidated by other kids. Even the ones that were taller, stronger, or better armed than I was. So I'm not sure why it hit me then when I was talking to Clancy Gray, the son of the most powerful man in the country, a true-blooded American prince who wore his black polo shirt with his collar popped under a matching cabin knit sweater. He was even wearing a leather belt. I crossed my arms over my chest. I'm more than capable of pulling my weight. Out in the sunlight, he was far less intimidating than he had been in the shade. And shorter. It was possible his reputation had added a few imaginary inches, but he was only a bit taller than I was, which meant both Liam and Chubs stood nearly a full head over him. Not that it did anything to knock his title of the most attractive person I had ever seen. Clancy was lean but not slight, well-kept but not groomed, composed but not comfortable. I thought, as the wind blew against us, that he might have been wearing some spicy cologne, but that seemed ridiculous. I was glad we were out on the porch, where everyone by the fire pit could see us. I didn't think he was going to hurt me or anything like that. Why would he? I felt my hands clasped together in front of me, then move to my side, then rise up to cup my elbows, like they couldn't figure out what they wanted to be doing. I hadn't forgotten my whole purpose in coming here, but I couldn't bring myself to ask for his help. He clearly had a good grasp on his own abilities if he was voluntarily diving into people's minds. The question should have come as naturally as breathing. If he had these kids following his every whim and order, it had to be because he was a good guy, right? People didn't help other people just for their health. Clancy was the kind of confidence, had the kind of confidence that made him the sun at the center of East River's galaxy. Everything and everyone orbited around his light. So, why couldn't I bring myself to ask? Why were my hands still shaking? I know you probably don't ever come around to liking me after our introduction, he said, but I am sorry. It didn't occur to me that you were keeping that information secret. It's fine, I said, but what does that have to do with my work assignment? For a few moments, he didn't say anything at all to me. He just stared. Will you stop? I muttered, feeling both flustered and annoyed at once. If I say you're forgiven, will you stop doing that? His mouth turned up in a handsome grin. No. Clancy, who apparently had never been taught about respecting someone's personal space, took a step forward, and I took a step back, off the bridge, my feet sinking into the sticky mud. Instead of backing off, he seemed to take it as a challenge and come toward me again. For whatever reason, mostly the flutter of nerves in my gut, I let him. Listen, he said, finally. The reason I told Mike not to assign you anything is because I'm hoping that you'll come work with me. Excuse me? Come on, you heard me. His hand closed over my arm, and it was like a bee had been set loose inside of my skull. My brain seemed to lurch full speed back into life, flooding with milky white images of the two of us sitting in front of his desk, staring at each other as the fire devoured everything around us. The images he was flooding into my mind. I don't know how he did it, but it was so real. The image was burning me up from the inside out, blistering my lungs. Pockets of acrid smoke bubbled up under my skin until it felt like I was about to burst open. My vision burned to black at the edges. Fire bloomed on my clothes, singeing my hair. This is not real. This is not real. This is not real. Clancy must have let go, or I must have found a way to twist away, because just as quickly as the fire came, it went back out, dispersing in 3 shaky exhales. You can't block me, he said, his eyes wide. Do you even know how to use your abilities? The file the League had on you made it sound like you could control it. Wasn't it obvious? I shook my head. That's why I'm here. I wanted to stay. That's why I need you. His gaze flickered down over me, from head to toe and back up again. When he spoke, his voice was soft, sympathetic. Look, I know how it is. You don't think I struggled with this too? How lonely it is to not be able to touch someone the way you want to? How terrifying it is to be trapped in somebody else's head without knowing the way out? Ruby, everything I've learned, I had to teach myself, and it was awful. I want to save you from that. I can teach you things, tricks, how to use your talents the way they're meant to be used. I hoped he couldn't see the way my hands were shaking. Oh my God, he had offered. I hadn't even had to ask, and I still couldn't say a damn thing. Clancy's posture relaxed, and when he touched me again, flicking my braid back over my shoulder, there was no ill will behind it. Think about it, okay? If you decide you want to, just come to my office. I'll clear my schedule for you. I pressed my lips together, biting down hard on my tongue. There's nothing wrong with wanting to know how to use your abilities, Clancy added. That's the only way we're ever going to beat them. Beat whom? There are so few of us left. Until you showed up in the system, I actually thought I was the only one. Well, there's at least one more. His name is Martin, and he's with the Children's League. He finished. I know. I assessed their report. And he's with the Children's League. He finished. I know. I accessed their report on him. Creepy kid. Well, I said us. I meant the non-psychotic oranges. I snorted. I'll think about it, I finally said. I was pinned under his dark gaze again, the hair on my arms standing on end, like a whisper of electricity had run over it. I took an unknowing step closer to him. Listen to your gut, Clancy said, turning to head back inside the office. A cluster of kids called out to him from where they were setting up lunch near the fire pit. And, ever the president's son, he smiled and waved at them real pretty. Listen to your gut. So, why was it at odds with my head? I made a beeline for the wood dock I had discovered the afternoon before, needing to find some way to wash out the jitters racing through my heart. My mind felt tangled with the possibilities. Clancy Gray had just offered me everything I could have asked for. A way to avoid repeating what had happened to my parents and Sam. A way to be with Liam, to find Grams, to not live in constant fear of what I could do to them. So why had it come tumbling out then? I ducked under the rope, tying off the path to the lake, and made it all the way down the trail before I realized anything was amiss. Crap, I said when I saw him. Oh no, 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 Chubs said. The goofy grin dropped his face, and he stopped throwing bread crusts out to the ducks gathered in the water. This is my secret hideout. No rubies allowed. I was here. I found it first. I huffed, plopping down next to him. You most certainly did not. Try a week ago while you were unpacking. He balked at that. Well, fine, but I got here first today. Aren't you supposed to be on guard duty? Garden duty. Got tired of hearing some girl coo about how smart the slip kid is for making them plant carrots. He leaned back. Aren't you on storage duty? I looked down at where my hands had clenched into fists. When I didn't answer, Chubs set the bread bag aside and sat up straight. Hey, you alright? He put a cool hand to my forehead. You look like you're going to be sick. Are you experiencing any migraines or dizziness? That was an understatement. I croaked out a laugh. Oh, he pulled his hand away. That kind of head trouble. I laid back against the rough wood and threw my arm over my eyes, hoping the darkness might help dampen the headache. You and Jack. You said Jack taught you how to use your abilities. Pretty much, he said. That was the only way I was ever going to learn. If some other kid taught me, it just took a while to decide. Why? Because I thought that if I didn't use them, they'd eventually go away, Chubs said quietly. I thought everything might go back to normal. There's scientific evidence that if we stop using parts of our brain, those sections will eventually cease to function, you know? After a moment, he asked, did Clancy offer to help you with your abilities? I nodded. I told him I'd think about it. What's there to think about? Chubb smacked me on my stomach with his books. Didn't you say that you didn't know how to control it? Well, yeah, but I'm afraid of how much I don't know. You need to be able to control it, otherwise it'll always control you, he said. It'll scare you and manipulate you until you go crazy, die, or they find the cure. And guess which one of those things will probably happen first? The lunch bell sounded 2 rings for second meal. Chubb stood and stretched, throwing the rest of the bread out into the water. You really think they're going to find a cure? I asked. My dad used to say that anything was possible when you put your mind to it. His mouth twisted into a humorless smile. At the mention of his father, my stomach clenched. You still haven't had a chance to send them a message. I've asked around, but there's only one computer in this entire godforsaken place, and only one person gets to use it. That's right. The silver laptop on Clancy's desk. Did you ask him if you could use it for a few minutes? Yeah, Chubb said as the fire pit came into view. It looked like they were handing out sandwiches and apples. He said no. Apparently it's a security risk if someone other than him touches it. I shook my head. I'll ask tomorrow. Maybe I can convince him. Could you? Chubbs grabbed my arm, his face lightening considerably. Will you tell him that we have a very important letter to deliver, but we need to be able to look up Jack's father's new address? Tell him we'll do anything. No, tell him that I will personally lick every single pair of shoes he owns clean. How about I just tell him that it's the whole reason we came here in the first place, I said, and leave your tongue out of it. Chubbs waited until I had taken my sandwich from the table before pulling me away. I thought he might want to eat back at the cabin or even the dock, but we wandered until we found Liam. He and a few of the other guys on the security team were on a break from their rounds and had found themselves a nice clearing in the trees. It was just wide enough to square off into 2 small teams for a quick game of hoverball, otherwise known as football with no hands. Chubbs and I found an old tree trunk to share, ignoring the small group of female spectators who had gathered to cheer the teams on. A tall redhead with an explosion of freckles on his face levitated the old football at the start of a play. He ran alongside it, trying to keep both it and himself out of reach of the others. Liam at one point had the football an inch in front of him, but his hands were too slow and his footwork too bad to catch it when it was tossed to him. Keep your eye on the ball, Butterfingers, I called. Liam's head whipped around in our direction. Just as his gaze locked on mine, Mike, who had the football at that point, mowed him over to get to the makeshift end zone. Chubs and I cringed as Liam hit the ground and knocked his head against one of the old tree roots. "Wow," I said. He wasn't kidding about sucking at sports. It'd be funny if it weren't so damn sad. The other boys were too busy laughing to keep the ball in the air. Liam stayed on the ground, his face flushed red, but his entire body shaking with laughter. He lifted his shirt to wipe sweat off his face, giving me, along with every other girl present, a glimpse of skin. This time I was the one blushing. One of the guys I didn't recognize jogged over to Liam and helped him up, patting him on the shoulder. They laughed together like they had known each other ever since preschool. But that was Liam for you. He joked about Zoo making friends at the drop of a hat, but he was the same way. But Chubs and I were perfectly content to sit by ourselves, watching, waiting, but not dipping our toes into the ocean. Maybe we had just gotten too used to being alone, and maybe that needed to change. The next morning, at exactly 9:21, I found myself standing outside of Clancy Gray's office, my hand raised and ready to knock. The only thing preventing me, besides the nerves hula hooping my gut, was the conversation happening on the other side of the door. "Sure, we have the kind of numbers to do that. If I sent the amount of kids we need, there wouldn't be enough left here to maintain watch." It was a girl's voice, soft but not sweet, Olivia most likely. If they were talking about security, I get what you're saying, Liv, but it would be a waste to miss this opportunity, Clancy was saying. "We're getting low on medical supplies, and Leda Corp has stopped running as many trucks up through our area. Are you going on another one of your trips?" she pressed. "Isn't that when you usually pick up tips about shipments? Why do you ask?" "It's just, you haven't gone on one in almost a year," Olivia said. "And you used to go all the time. I know we haven't been hurting for supplies, but maybe if you met with your source." "No," Clancy said with finality. "I can't leave the camp anymore. It's not safe." The floorboards creaked. Did something come up on the PSF scanner? Came Hayes' gruff voice. "They heard about the fruit stunt, obviously," Clancy said. "It would have been hard to miss, considering you mutilated that driver." "Why do you have to say it like that?" "Because you should have just left him there, like I told you to. I appreciate you wanting to spread the symbol, but couldn't you have spray painted it on the truck?" "Are you worried this will get bad for our image?" Olivia's voice dripped annoyance. "Most people are going to have a hard enough time accepting that we're not monsters without reports about us maiming innocent people," Clancy said. "So please, keep spreading the black. Keep using the symbol. Just try for some substance." "Some what? Tea?" Hayes asked. "I'm sorry to cut our meeting short, but it seems like you both have things under control, and I have someone waiting for me," Clancy said. I pulled myself away from the door. "Liv, plan the hit. I'll worry about our numbers." I took a few steps back, down the staircase, but it was pointless to pretend that I hadn't been listening. The door opened, and the girl, Olivia, was the first to appear. She was tall and willowy, with legs for days and a tan that made her skin glow. I shook my head and turned to allow her and Hayes to squeeze by. Olivia was probably about my age, but she looked so much older. She looked like what I imagined 20 would feel like. When I looked up again, Clancy was leaning against the door frame, grinning. "You came." He waved me inside and guided me toward his desk, sitting down in one of the chairs. I had a fleeting look at the other side of his room, where the curtains had been restrung. Clancy took his usual seat behind his desk, rocking the chair back as he smiled. "What made you change your mind?" "It's like you said," I mumbled. "There are so few of us left, and I want to know how I can be around the people I love and not be terrified of erasing myself." I read on the League's network that they weren't able to find any other oranges aside from you and Martin, Clancy said. "Most of the Reds were killed, apparently. That puts us at the head of the pack." "I guess," I said. Another thought occurred to me. How do you have access to the League's network and the PSF's? I gestured around the room. "Any of this?" "I have friends everywhere," Clancy said simply. His fingers drummed against his desk, and my father leaves me alone because he wouldn't be able to stand the outrage if I exposed the fact that there is no rehabilitation program, not for people like you and me. "Me and you," I repeated. Clancy ran a hand through his hair. "The first thing you need to understand, Ruby, is that we're not like the others. Me and you, everyone classified as orange. We're different, special." No, wait. I see you rolling your eyes, but you have to listen, okay? Because the second thing you have to understand is that everyone, my father, the camp controllers, the scientists, the PSFs, the Children League, they've been lying to you this entire time. We're special, not because of what we are, but what they can't make us into. "You're not making any sense," I said. He stood up and came around the desk to sit next to me. "Would it help if I told you my story first?" My eyes flickered up to meet his. "If I do, you have to promise that it stays between us." Keeping secrets, that I could do. "All right," he said. "Give me your hand. I'm going to have to show you." When I had slipped into other minds, there had always been a queasy feeling of sinking involved in it. More often than not, I found myself dropped in the middle of a swamp of dimly lit memories and unrestrained feelings with no map, no flashbacks, and no easy way of finding the way out. But there was nothing frightening about Clancy's mind. His memories were bright and crisp, full of blooming images and colors. It felt like he had taken my hand there too, and was guiding me down a long hallway of windows into his past. We only stopped long enough for me to glance inside each of them. The office was plain, stuffed full of gunmetal gray filing cabinets, but little else. It could have been anywhere. The white paint was fresh enough that it bubbled on the wall, but I recognized the beginnings of crescent-shaped machines in the back corner and the man staring me down from across the card table, serving at his desk. He was plump and balding at his hairline, and a permanent fixture in the infirmary. I watched his lips move in a soundless explanation, my eyes drifting down to the crisp stack of papers on the desk in front of him. My eyes kept drifting down to his hand resting against the table, weighing down a sheet of once folded paper that was trying to curl back in on itself. There, at the top of it, the White House emblem. The words went into crystal focus, and I felt my eyes jump over them, drinking them in with disbelief. Dear sirs, you may have my permission to run tests and experimental treatments on my son, Clancy James Beaumont Gray, provided these do not leave visible scars. The lights in the office grew brighter and brighter, bleaching out the memory when they faded again. I was in a much different room in the infirmary, this one all blue tiles and beeping monitors. No, I thought, trying to jerk free of the Velcro restraints that held me down against the metal table. I knew what this place was. The overhead lights were drawn down closer to my face by a gloved hand. At the corner of my vision, I saw the scientists and doctors in their white scrubs, setting up machines and computers around me. My jaw was clenched shut around the leather muzzle they had strapped to the back of my head, and hands kept my head still as wires and monitors were hooked up. I struggled again, twisting my neck far enough to catch sight of a table lined with scalpels and small drills. I saw my reflection in the nearby observation window, young, pale with terror, a mirror image of the portraits that would later hang across the camp. The harsh light from above grew and swelled, eating the scene. When it faded, the memory had changed again. My eyes fell first on the hand I was shaking, then slid up to the unfocused eyes of the same scientists I had seen before. The men hovering around us all had that murky quality to their expressions, blank smiles, blanker eyes. I squared my shoulders, a small thrill of victory working its way through my center as I moved through the main gate to the waiting black car. The man in the suit that welcomed me in with a perfunctory pat on the shoulder wasn't the president, but he appeared in nearly every memory that fired next, ushering me onto stages in school auditoriums, outside domed state capitol buildings, in front of cameras at the centers of small towns. Each time I would be handed the same set of note cards to read, be faced with the same expressions of hope and deep grief from the crowd. Always my lips began to form the same words. My name is Clancy Gray, and I am here to tell you how the camp rehabilitation program saved my life. Another light, this time from a camera's flash. When the shock of it faded, I was looking up into a face that was an older, weathered version of my own. The photographer flipped the monitor around for us to see the portrait. I was no longer seeing myself as a boy, but a young man, 15, maybe even 16, as the photographer set up his equipment again, this time across the room. I put a hand on the president's back, guiding him around the couches to the great dark wood desk. The rose bushes were scratching intensely at the windows, but I directed his focus to the sheet of paper waiting there for him and compelled him to pick up the pen. When he finished signing, he turned to me with an unfocused gaze and a numb, unknowing smile. Weeks must have passed, months, maybe even years. I felt the exhaustion creep through me, wrapping itself like a heavy chain around my center. It was dark now. I couldn't place the time of night, though I saw that it was a hotel room, and not a particularly good one. I was staring up at the ceiling, half buried under the covers, when a figure seemed to peel itself out from the shadows of the closet. It was fast, almost too much for me to keep up with. A man in a black mask, the metallic gleam of a gun. I threw my covers off of me and kicked my leg out, sending the attacker stumbling back. The shot went off from his gun with a combustion of light and little sound. The smell of it scorched my nostrils. I was flipped onto my back, one of the man's forearms braced against my neck, crushing the fragile rings of cartilage. My hand lashed out, hitting the rough carpet, the nightstand, and finally his face. Not even the terror pulsing through every inch of me kept me from crashing into his mind. Stop! I felt my lips form the word, but I couldn't hear myself. Stop! And the man did, with the blank look of someone whose skull had just been cracked open and exposed to freezing air. He sat back, his gun on the floor at his side. I was coughing and hacking, trying to bring air into my lungs, but I grabbed the gun and stuffed it into the waistband of my pajamas. I stopped long enough to grab my winter coat from where it had been thrown across the room's desk chair, and then I was outside, in the hallway, staring at the place where a man should have been posted outside my door to guard me, and I knew what was going on. I knew what would happen to me if someone were to find me alive in the morning. I was running down the hotel stairs, out through the kitchens, out back past the dumpsters, and through the parking lot, running, my chest on fire, hearing the sounds of voices shouting after me, boots pounding on the pavement, running for the trees, the darkness. Ruby! Ruby! I came back to myself in Clancy's office bit by bit, with a headache severe enough that I had to put my face between my legs to avoid throwing up all over myself. They tried to kill you, I said when I finally found my voice. Who? Who do you think? Clancy's voice was dry. That man was one of the Secret Service agents who were supposed to be guarding me. That doesn't make any sense. I pressed the back of my hand to my forehead, squeezing my eyes shut against the dizziness. If they were carting you around and using you to explain the rehab program, then why? Because he figured out that I hadn't been rehabbed at all, he said. My father, I mean. Only reason they let me out of Thurman is because I made them think that I had been cured. But I got too ambitious. I tried to play my father by influencing him, and I got caught. Clancy trailed off for a moment. He was worried that the truth about the camps would get out, I'm sure. But he couldn't just take me out of the public eye. Not when he'd been the one to thrust me into it, no. I think in his mind it was easier to just get rid of me altogether before I could make trouble. I can only imagine what kind of spine he'd put on. I can only imagine what kind of spin he'd put on my murder to get back in the sympathetic graces of his fellow Americans. I stared at him for a long while, speechless. How did you survive that life? I wanted to ask. How are you? You, and not the monster they would have turned you into. After I got out that night, I met Hayes and then Olivia, and then others. We found this place and went to work. And all the while, my father couldn't put a bounty out on me, not without exposing the truth about me and his rehab program. He had to make up some lie about me attending college to get the press off his back. Clancy smiled then. So you see, I did win in the end. He rose from his chair, reaching out a hand. I took it without being conscious of it, feeling some calm wash over me as he squeezed my fingers. My head was silent. I felt myself lean forward. When I heard your story, I knew I had to meet you. I had to make sure that you knew the truth about what was going on, so you wouldn't be caught in the dark the way I was. The truth? I looked up, startled. What do you mean? Clancy didn't release my hands. He only sat on the edge of the desk in front of me. The woman who broke you out of Thurman, the league agent, what did she tell you about the white noise they used that day? That the camp controllers had embedded a frequency in it that only oranges, reds, and yellows could detect, I said. He must have known about that. They used the same method to broadcast the location of the camp, that they were trying to pick out any of the dangerous ones that were still hiding out. Clancy released my hand and reached back to turn his laptop so it faced us. On the screen was a snapshot of my face on the morning they had brought us into camp, but the text beside it wasn't my story. Read the second paragraph out loud. I looked up at him, confused, but did as he asked. Camp Controller Harris discovered the discrepancy in the comm control at 5:23 the following morning, after noticing an underlying frequency that had been added without his consent. I paused, licking my dry lips. Upon further investigation of the recording devices in the mess hall, he came to the conclusion that the outbreak of violence there that resulted in the use of the comm control at approximately 11:42 was directly provoked by undercover operatives from the terrorist group of the Children's League. He believes these same operatives planted an identification frequency in the comm control, PSI subject 3285 and 5312, who were taken from camp boundaries at approximately 3:34 by a Children's League operative, are now believed to have been mistakenly identified as green upon their initial classification. Keep going, Nancy said with my voice when my voice trailed off. Subjects 3285 and 5312 are believed to be highly dangerous. Orders have been issued for their immediate recapture and reprocessing. My eyes flew up again. But the way this is written, they didn't know. They didn't. Are you trying to tell me that they had no idea I was an orange until after I got out? Clancy nodded. It sounds that way. Then I wasn't in any danger after all. They wouldn't have killed me. Oh, you were definitely in danger, he said. They had all of the pieces, and it just took one curious mind to put it all together. But if you're asking whether or not you would have been caught if the Children's League hadn't planted the frequency, then the answer to that is no, probably not. Then why did they do it? I demanded. It seems like a huge risk to take to only get a few kids. A few extremely valuable, rare kids, he corrected. Kids that would have been killed otherwise. Seeing my expressions, he added, not unkindly, you didn't really think they let any of the kids like us live, did you? Not oranges. Yellows, yes, because their threat can be contained, but not oranges. I passed a hand over my face. What about the reds then? They were killed too? No. Clancy said. His voice became quiet, hesitant. They had a much worse fate. I waited for him to continue, hands twisting in my lap. The President's classified program. Clancy crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back. Project Jamboree. Dear old Dad's been training himself. A special army using all of the reds they took from the camps. So, can you see why? He cleared his throat. You can see why the League would be interested in finding any particularly dangerous kids for their own. I shook my head, dropping my face into my hands. Of all the scenarios I had imagined, of all the things I thought had happened to those kids, this was too insane for me to ever dream up. How could they force them into this? I asked, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. Why did they agree? What other choice did they have? Clancy asked. They were made to think that if they didn't cooperate, something would happen to their families. They underwent a special conditioning program to make them think that they were needed and cared for absolutely. Before my father and his advisors figured out I was influencing them, I was able to supervise enough of the program to ensure that they would be cared for, better than if they had been in camps at least. He shook his head. Don't be afraid for them. They'll get out from under my father's control one day. And they're not dead. I thought that there's that. Ruby. I looked up, feeling cold down to my guts. Let me show you what I know, he whispered, his other hand rising to brush the hair off my cheek. The clenched mass of nerves in my stomach eased at the touch, and I felt what few suspicions I had left about him unwinding. We were the same, in the ways that mattered. He wanted to help me, even though I had nothing to offer him in return. No one will be able to hurt you or change you if you can fight them off, he said softly. It wasn't depression that drove me forward. It wasn't even self-pity. It was a pure, distilled strand of hatred, weaving its way through my core. I thought the Slip Kid would be able to help me reclaim my old life. But now I knew that wasn't enough. I needed him to help me protect my future. When I spoke, my words burned the air between us. teach me. And that, my dear friends, is the end of chapter 22. Tune in next time, and let's see how the training is going to go. I'm your host, Ruby, and as always, thank you for tuning in, and I shall see you next time. Ruby out.